Welcome to the Wisdom Rising podcast. I'm your host, Lama Tsultrim Alione, and my goal with this podcast is really to open your own wisdom, to have your own wisdom rising, either through the meditations that I lead or introduce you to, or to the people that I interview that bring wisdom with them in their own voice, in their own traditions. So we look forward to raising our wisdom together on the Wisdom Rising podcast, and I'm so happy to share this with you. So I wanted to tell you about our precious, really precious guest, Bob Thurman, old friend of mine, and he's done so much for the Tibetan tradition. I believe we were the first two monastics ordained in the Tibetan tradition. He was before me by some years. I was 1970 and he was sometime in the 60s. He was the first Western Tibetan monk, and I believe I was the first Western Tibetan. So we have that deep connection. And now, without further ado, I'd like to bring my dear friend Bob Thurman in.
Hi.
Yes, so nice to see you. Yeah, maybe begin by just telling everybody what you're doing now and what's happening in your world. Where are you? Where are you tuning in from? And thank you so much for being with us.
That's so nice. Lama, I was, you made me think we were the first ordained people from the West by the wonderful, sweet Tibetans. And that's right, And I wish we'd had more times even, but never mind. I'm sure we've been on this path together for many lifetimes. If we only knew what they were, I only had a few hints at different times. I was, actually it was at Mount Kalaish, and I noticed there were some previous forms of myself. Wow. And they were kind of kidding with each other because they were aware of each other, which I had not been. And they were joking around, and they were saying, we always wanted to go to Mount Kalaish. And now we finally get there as this idiot from New York. And it was so graphic. I was just bowing to the mountain, from the first place of seeing it. I wrote about it in my book, Circling the Sacred Mountain. I was bowing because when you first see it, there's a place, and the Tibetans, when the road comes up out of a ravine that it's been going in for a long time, then in that part of Western Tibet, and then it comes up and there's a flat spot where you can see the mountain if there's clear weather. And it was evening, and there was beautiful sunset plume of clouds streaming from its, like a banner from its peak. And so I was bowing, and they make little cairns there, the Tibetans, And as I came up from the first bow, I was under these voices, these people who, so I knew they were me, and they were chatting with each other in Tibetan. And they were like, really, it was bittersweet for them. They were there now as me, but they were, of course, in a good humor. But they were saying, well, we should have come when in our lifetimes. We knew so much more about all this than him. We never got there because of all the bandits and the roads or whatever it was. And then I literally almost twisted my neck, turning around to look up because it was like they were right above me. And then they disappeared. They hit. I don't even know for sure who they are, really. But I'm sure you had experiences like that. But it's really nice. It's nice that we can help people in these tough times with a little bit. What is it that comes from Tibet? They're sort of very cheery people.
Mm-hmm.
There's something cheery about the Tibetans. Even that's what was so amazing to us, wasn't it? When we met them in the 60s, and I met them in 62, you in the late 60s. And there are these people who have been through hell and high water of invasion and exile and frostbite and coming out to very poor countries to seek asylum and so on. And yet they somehow kept a kind of cheerfulness about themselves. They were not in a kind of cosmic depression like life is impossible or things, what I mean, in general, there's something about the culture. And what is that thing about the culture? Is it, I'm sort of thinking For example, they mentally kind of are in a mode like they don't go all the way toward the despair. There's something cheeriness about life that doesn't make death seem so awful. It is still awful. It does still awful, even to Tibet. People shouldn't think that because of belief in future life, people who believe in future lives are just so scared of being nothing. That's not at all the case. If it was sure for nothing, that's also okay. That's like anesthesia. I mean, that's not. It would be better to have fun, but nothing is at least not painful. But there's too much dread, I think, in the West. So we survived many decades, and we were touched. I think I was. I don't know about you. I feel I was touched by people who didn't feel the dread of sort of the end of everything coming. There was something they were going to carry on at whatever plane or whatever level they are, and that was really essential. I felt at the time. I wanted to learn that language right away. I wanted to be with them. That was all I wanted to do.
Yeah. I noticed that same thing. I noticed that when I went to Dharamsala in 1967, there's actually somebody who studied the Tibetans in trauma named Jack Soul. And what he discovered is that they don't show the same signs of trauma of other cultures who have been through similar. So he studied why, and it is their spiritual life and their practices of compassion, and even to the Chinese who tortured them or killed their families or whatever, that they would still offer love and compassion to those beings, and that actually created an extremely different kind of experience of trauma than is experienced in most cases with the level of what those people went through. And so I didn't, of course, know all that. They hadn't done those studies at that time, but I was fascinated by how these people could be so happy. And then they tell you their stories, kind of smiling while they tell you how they saw their whole family shot in front of them. And it didn't make any sense to a 19-year-old from New Hampshire. So, yeah, we were lucky to be there at that time also with those very fresh refugees, and then the lamas, who many of whom have died now. Yes. But those lamas trained in Tibet and teachers of His Holiness, and all those lamas that I was able to meet then just died recently, over 100 years old. So, yeah, that is really amazing. I wonder if you could maybe tell one story of your days as a monk. What was that like for you?
I think I was a little bit of a pain in the neck monk because I was, the Tibetans are kind of relaxed about it, right? Like they eat in the evening, cold climate, They don't do gongche, they don't do only before noon, right, etc. And they're kind of happy-go-lucky in a certain type of way. But once I became a monk, then I had to finish them by noon, or I wouldn't eat till the next day. And I was like a stickler on about everything, and looking disapprovingly if they were being a little like, hanging out, not meditating. I wanted everybody to sort of be practicing madly and so on, and they don't always do that, as you know. They hang out, and as many do, but they don't always do that. And so I was kind of a bother, I think, actually. And but they were kind to me anyway. And then I argued a lot, because I was learning logic and learning about emptiness and learning how. And then my teacher, my Mongolian teacher who was a geshe from Gomang, but he also had a very huge experience in Asia life. Nowadays, I think I refer to him when people are wondering about him. I say he was my Mr. Miyagi, the guy in the Karate Kid with a little tiny beard. He was sort of like a character. He wasn't a highfalutin, didn't play the role of a highfalutin lama, but he was actually very highfalutin, actually, psychically. But he didn't play that role. He refused to teach me the techniques and strategies of formal debate, the one with clap your hand and do that. And I said, why not? Why won't you teach me? He said, oh, you make too many people unhappy. You can debate well enough just naturally and you'll bother them, but I'm not going to teach you the formal method. And I was very miffed at the time, you know. He didn't also want to make me a monk. He refused. And then he took me to meet in 64. And he said, after being with him for about a year and a half, because I was bugging him all the time to be a monk, he said, well, maybe the Dalai Lama will make you a monk, you know, so you can go with me if you want. I have to go to India and do this and do that. So I went. I raised some money from my grandfather, and I went. And then when he introduced me to Dalai Lama as a whatever, you know, good student, wants to study, will you help him? And I was already speaking Tibetan, actually. But then he said, he wants to be a monk, Your Holiness, and he's sincere about it. It isn't anything fake. But he won't be able to be a monk in the future, is my view as an old Mongolian. But you're the Dalai Lama, you decide. But my advice is don't make him a monk. Just let him live like one, but don't make him a monk. Formally, he said to His Holiness took it under advisement. But he did anyway. He made me a monk anyway. And then the old geshe was turned out correct eventually. And I became a layman again, you know. So I don't like people introduce me as the monk, you know, because then I have to say I'm an ex-monk, you know. Yeah. I am. And His Holiness was a little upset, not as much as Ling Rinpoche, who had given me the novice vow, you know. But anyway, so when I was a monk, that's what I would do. And then then the other thing the old geshe did before my Mr. Miyagi, when he left me in Dharamsala in the winter of 64, he said he had set me up in a good way and blah, blah. And then he left. And then he arrived with Yishi Dunden, who was His Holiness's physician at that time. Yeah. And he said, you study Tibetan medicine with this man here. You become his apprentice and you learn all about Tibetan medicine. And I said, what? I don't want to learn Tibetan medicine. I'm learning about emptiness. I want to meditate. I want to be enlightened. Yeah, later you can get into that. Now you study more on about medicine. You have to learn that. And so I did, because you don't say no to a Mongolian. and I'm so happy I did. It was really an amazing kind of experience. And Tibetan medicine is an extraordinary system. It's like Ayurveda. In fact, I think it's one of the contributors to Indian Ayurveda, without them now remembering, because they lost their Buddhist side, you know, in India, the second millennium. But it's really amazing system. It fits with the Dharma, you know, Four Noble Truths and the way of being diagnosed as a sick person by a doctor. These are interconnected totally beautifully. Mm-hmm. It's really amazing. You know, I'm sure you know about it. So anyway, I would study all day, and I would meditate as whenever I could. And I was happy to be away from my Mr. Miyagi, my Geshe-shala, because he would always interrupt my meditating. He didn't want me meditating. He said, you can't meditate. I said, why not? He said, well, you're not ready. You have to learn more. And he went on and on about it. And even when I came back to his monastery, after having been ordained and, you know, been around a little bit as a monk, and he still prevented my meditating. And he once said, oh, don't, what are you staying up all night? Just get a rest and whatever you do. You can't meditate. I said, why not? He said, well, and then he says, well, why are you meditating? And I said, what do you mean? I want to be enlightened. Then he said, well, you can't be enlightened. I said, why not? He said, because you're an American. He said,
oh, really?
And then I said, what do you mean? I knew what he was getting at. And I said, I really do think of the future life. I know there's a future life. I'm not like just believing that this is the only life. And I knew that's what he was getting at. And he said, yeah. He said, well, yeah, I know sort of you do. But in a way, the problem with you Americans is what gets enlightened is your mind. And at a deep level, you don't think you have one, he said. That was his precept. And I argued like mad for months after that with him. And then finally, I kind of realized that deep down, you know, we don't really live as if, you know, we do think about our retirement. I'm now retired. We do think about next week, next year, you know, the event, we plan, we have a calendar, make a schedule, etc. So we kind of live in the context that we're going to be around in this form for some time. But we don't think that beyond the death like that, you know. It's not a real thing to us in a way, because the consensual culture is like that. It's like immediate, whatever it is, you know, this is all there is, you know, and the wall is really the real thing, the room here, the house, this body, and this identity is it. And that's what he meant. And you have to go so deep to do that. And he didn't want me, especially when I first encountered the study, I would go slip into these altered states. I knew something about other kinds of altered states before that even. But anyway, I would go into another kind of altered state, like I would really kind of go out of body. And I think he felt I would get addicted or I would get stuck in those altered states if I meditated, or I understood more about non-duality. So the wish to escape from the nervousness and escape from the mental discomforts and escape from the worries and the anxieties and things. And so the dualistic way, is easier and quicker, and that's why Buddha taught the Theravada and this kind of things that teach that nirvana is outside this world. He didn't teach the non-duality right away. He said later that people will be ready for that. They'll be mature for that. But he didn't share it widely in his life on purpose. And I understand that, and I get that. And I think that's what he was doing. He was preventing me from escaping and getting sort of feeling like I'm safe because I have a place to escape to. Some of things a little harder, that we're going to change everything with us. We're going to bring everybody along, right? It's too much. It's too much when we don't have enough self-confidence, I think, at first,
Maybe you could explain your understanding of emptiness.
My favorite word is Nagarjuna's, and I couldn't find it in any of the present paramitas that are indexed electronically. In other words, in doing a search program, I couldn't find this particular phrase that's in Nagarjuna's book called Shunta, It's so beautiful in Tibetan with the ning, 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 doten, which I translate as emptiness, the womb of compassion. It's his description of the highest kind of non-dual, somewhat intimidating to people who are not used to it, teaching about emptiness. Very importantly, the great universal compassion comes from realizing one's own transparency, let's say, one's own complete openness, which is what emptiness. Emptiness could be translated as freedom, radical freedom. But it doesn't mean freedom to then harm people and do stupid things. Because when you reach radical freedom, real, true, complete freedom, then you're still around, you are completely generous and friendly and compassionate, and because you have nothing better to do. And you're aware, in a field of openness, you're aware that others really like it when you're nice. And then they're nice, and that makes everybody happy. And it's really stupid to be mean in any way. Even in your mind, even if you're being polite, but you have some mean thoughts in mind, that ruins the whole day. So emptiness is really getting free from being compelled by any causal process that would overwhelm your judgment about what's best in a particular situation. And that's why it's the womb of compassion, because of course, it's a little tricky, though, because people wrongly think emptiness is like empty space. Because actually, in many teachings, they use the word space as a kind of way of thinking about this inconceivable thing, which emptiness is. But emptiness is not more space than it is any solid object. The so-called solid object, like this table or this computer or this screen or this program or you and me, are just as much emptiness as some space in between us. And that's really important. Remember, in the Heart Sutra, matter is emptiness. Emptiness is matter. They say form, and people get a vague idea. They don't know what it means when you say form. But if you say matter, which is what you should, for that's how that should be translated. Emptiness is matter. Matter is emptiness, because the Buddhists discovered that quantum thing long before the Western people did. And Buddha discovered, certainly. So emptiness is this radical freedom which doesn't destroy a single thing. It's not like everything dissolves into nothingness or something. It's not nothing. That's the key. It's beyond nothing. Nothing, luckily, isn't there because it's nothing. But emptiness is there and is everything. That's the beautiful thing. So then that's why it becomes the root of compassion, because once you realize that the absolute you're seeking of nirvana is all of these things and all of these people, they are all there too. Because that's the nature of it all. It's made of nirvana, almost, you could say. The world is made of nirvana. And once you realize that, then you realize there's no place to escape to. And when you realize that, you realize, well, then I'm going to make the very best of this. And then you become determined to do that. And when you want to make the very best of this, then you have someone in front of you who's unhappy, and making the best of it is that they be happy. So then that becomes like somebody idea, that becomes absolute. That unhappy person becomes God, like these religious people go, God, and then they say they're not going to investigate, like they're not going to investigate this and that because they're people of God, they're crazy, But the point is the suffering is God. And like Jesus also said, you do something for somebody, that's it, then you're in heaven. And Bodhisattva idea is just the same. I was so happy when you asked people to renew their bodhicitta, and then you said, our bodhicitta is being here together. I thought that was so sweet, and that's so absolutely right. I'm late nowadays. I'm obsessed with the Flower Ornament Sutra, Tom Cleary's translation of the Do Pelboche, the wonderful Buddha-Tamsika Sutra. And there it says that if somebody decides to become a Buddha, because if you're a Buddha, you can really help other people. And because you really know what their problem is, you're like the ultimate physician and spiritual teacher or whatever it may be, whatever they need, you can be that. And if you get the idea there's such a thing to be, then you say, okay, I'm going to be that. I don't care how many lifetimes it takes me, how long it is. Then the sutra, it says, the minute you have that initial determination, by imagining there is a way to be that is the optimal way to be with everybody, then from the time you will get there, even though it might seem like 1,000,000 lifetimes, it's like a minute. You're like already there. Because it's at that time is the fact that the length of the time is kind of an illusory. They hammer that idea in very, very much. It's really a delight because sooner or later we'll all get there. So emptiness, people shouldn't be afraid of emptiness. They should be happy. Emptiness saves them from nothingness. Nothingness is what we're taking the world toward because of the dominance of materialism as an ideology in our world. It doesn't mean that we're Marxists to be materialists. You can be a capitalist and be very materialist. What materialism means in the spiritual and philosophical level is that this material body is you. And all our sciences are based on that. You are just the brain, and you're not anything other than that. You have no soul, you have no spirit, you have no mind. And that's what he meant, my Geshe-la. That's such a terrible, depressing view. And it's completely insane, actually, because that's what? Nothing is nothing. And emptiness is not nothing. Emptiness just means relativity of everything. Everything is totally interrelated, and all those interrelated things are empty of any non-related component. There's no little thing hiding inside Lama Tsultrim or inside Bob that is the Bob thing, that is a thing in itself and doesn't connect to anything else, and it's unique, and it's this and blah, blah, blah. No, everything is totally interwoven with everything else. That's what emptiness means. So therefore, the only logical way to be with other things that seem to be other things is to be loving and compassionate toward them. Therefore, emptiness, the womb of compassion. What do you think?
Thank you. Yeah. Beautiful explanation of emptiness. I was struck by the use of the word matter for form, and then thought about how the word matter actually comes from the Latin mater, which is mother, and this split between matter and spirit has been the cause of really our ecological downfall.
Yes.
And so much destruction in the world of turning away from matter and not honoring it. The split, that even Buddhism, like that sort of let's get out of here, let's go to nirvana.
Absolutely.
It's so important that we need to stay here and treat it as sacred. Matter is mother. This is our world.
Yes. The word rupa has two meanings in Sanskrit and sukh in Tibetan, which is it can mean a visual object, which is where they get the form from. And I think the English translators of the Pali texts like Rhys David and of the early translators of the 19th century, they wanted to impose that Platonic idea of the forms, when they found rupa. But rupa skandha means the material body. And when it says in the Heart Sutra, when it says matter is emptiness, emptiness is matter, matter is not other than emptiness, emptiness is not other than matter, then they really want to collide our notion of a solid thing with our notion of openness, and realize that it is actually solid. Things are open because they're solid. In other words, we can bump into them because they're relative, and we relate to them by bumping into them. And or we could see through them with an X-ray machine, or if we had X-ray vision, which we could get. Then we find that it's wonderful that the people who have investigated matter, now the materialist scientists, discovered that they can't pin it down. It dissolves under analysis. It goes through the quantum level, and then it's uncertainty. And so that's a rediscovery of mind, actually, that you can't get away from mind, but they then turn away from that. And they think they'll find some ultimate particle later. They keep blowing stuff up to try to find more ultimate particles. But they won't. Buddha saw through that a long time ago. The real scientist Buddha was. One other thing, try to adopt the infinite lifestyle. Live for eternity. Make each moment count for eternity. And you'll be much happier, and you'll be able to be much helpful to everyone. There's another great thing in the Theravada literature. They say that whatever you do and whatever meditation you realize and recognize will be good in the hereafter. It'll be good in the ultimate, you'll reach nirvana, but it'll also be good in your immediate worldly situation. It'll improve your immediate life.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, everyone. And this time with you, Bob, and these gems of wisdom that you dropped into our mind streams are beautiful. And I see that you have a course going on, this Flower Ornament Sutra, and some people are doing that. That's wonderful.
Good.
I hope that you and I see each other in this body again soon. It was so precious to be together in Costa Rica.
All the best.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us for this Wisdom Rising podcast. May it benefit all beings. And I'd like to take a moment to thank the production team of Wisdom Rising, and also to let you know that if you would like further information on my work or the associated people who work with Tara Mandala, you can reach out to the Tara Mandala website, TaraMandala.org. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.